Truthfully, President Biden has no leverage over Putin. Putin has escalated his dominance. There's a doctrine that the Russians called escalation dominance that they apply to their warfighting style as well as their negotiating style. As you know, Russia has been waging devastating cyber attacks on the United States to the point where they've been striking our critical infrastructure, such as gas and food supply, right? He also has amassed 114,000 troops along the Ukrainian border. So he has intimidated Biden, and he's not taking President Biden seriously. So whatever it is that they discussed during the 2 hours has had no positive outcome, and the Kremlin pretty much didn't expect any. And I surveyed the Russian media, which is pretty much government controlled today, and they are saying that there's nothing that was resolved and nothing could possibly be resolved out of this meeting. Putin is simply using Biden to boost his image and Russia's image.
That's definitely what it seems like. And I thought it was weird, too. You mentioned just some of what we were able to see, some of the video sprays and some of the stills. And it's weird because it was all Russian images and it was all Russian video, nothing from the United States. And apparently none of the United States press was allowed in. And I thought, well, that you just out Putin in that regard. That's weird. Did you find that odd?
Absolutely. Well, I found it odd, like from the American standpoint, but as a former intelligence officer, this is not odd at all. What's funny, Dana, that I usually, because I am a Russian fluent speaker, native speaker, and we are at least 8 hours, Russia is 8 hours ahead of us, right? I usually get all the news from the Russian sources, but going directly. And then I compare what is really the difference. So I was searching, what did the US media really show in terms of what happened? And I couldn't find anything. And of course, I go on the Russian sources and they have everything. They have President Biden kind of joking around, with Putin. Putin is waving. The Russian media is basically saying Russia and the United States could be partners, which is an obvious influence operation on Biden, very similar to what Putin was conducting on former President Bush. When Bush said, I looked in Putin's eye and I saw his soul. So it's very, very odd. Yes, the Russians typically give access to their media, even though they insist that there's no access to US media, because our media is more or less still somewhat democratic. I say still because I definitely notice the slide in my adopted homeland in terms of the freedom of speech. It's not what it used to be when I came here 30 years ago.
Oh, definitely not. We're talking with Rebekah Koffler, a former intelligence agent, author of Putin's Playbook. I want to go back a little bit because this obviously began with this long-held quest by Russian leadership they wanted a warm, deep-water port in the Black Sea. And I cannot pronounce this name to save my life, but it's Sevastopol, which is right there in the middle of the Black Sea, right there. They lease it from Ukraine, as I understand, and I think the lease expires like in 2042. And they could be happy with leasing it, but they're really not. They really want to be able to control that port. It's very central, especially I think they really felt that with the war going on in Syria and the reliance and how important that factored into it. And so ultimately, this kind of comes down to a little bit of this Black Sea dominance and just wanting that resource from Ukraine. And Ukraine obviously does not want to give that to them. And tell me a little bit about, how long this has been building to get to this point now where we have, as you were just saying, 114,000 some odd Russian soldiers at Ukraine's border.
Spot on, Dana. So this has been going on for quite a while, more than a decade. Back in 2010, Russia has declared in its military doctrine the United States and NATO as Russia's principal threat because our foreign policies are on a collision course. We are fighting over the same sphere of influence. Russia perceives the post-Soviet state as its security perimeter, something that they should dominate the United States believes that Ukraine and other former Soviet republics have the right to pursue their own path of development and become independent and democratic. Well, that is not acceptable to Putin. Putin would like to reestablish the former Soviet Union. They're calling it the Union right now. And he perceives the Biden administration as a perfect window of opportunity to achieve his strategic ambitions to rebuild the Russian Empire. Why? Because the Russian intelligence services have assessed that our chief executive is weak both on policy and health-wise, and they think he's easily manipulated, and this is why they've been building up to it, and now is the time that they believe is to act.
So this really, because it's always, you always want to kind of second guess some of the stuff that comes from whether it's the media nowadays or even our own government, especially this administration. You know, how soon could they actually act to do this? Some are saying that it could be as early as January 2022.
So it is not clear right now whether Putin has made a decision. It's my professional assessment as a former intelligence officer that at this point, he has not made the final decision. And this is what all this intimidation of Ukraine is about. He likes keeping the West on edge. He likes fluctuating the force posture, which is, by the way, sufficient for both the outright takeover of Ukraine and the removal of President Zelensky in something like a regime change style of coup that, by the way, the Russians constantly accuse the United States of doing. So by fluctuating the force posture, the Russians are testing our responses, and they are testing whether NATO and the United States have the stomach to conduct war on behalf of Ukraine and risk nuclear escalation, because Russia has determined that war is inevitable because our interests collide, and therefore they have developed a very unique military strategy that bypasses US conventional superiority. That's why you see cyber attacks, you will see space warfare types of strikes. This is why they conducted, you probably remember, back on November 15th or so, an anti-satellite missile test. This was a direct message to the United States. So there's a whole playbook, just like what I called my book, where I describe both kinetic and non-kinetic methods, you know, intimidation, cyber warfare, space warfare, spycraft, and all of these other things.
And you really see now, too, with all of the stories about Russia and the U.S. election, that just really does, it seems like it was, you know, a distraction to kind of hide what was actually, you know, some of this other stuff that they could build up without the American public at large paying attention. Talking to Rebekah Koffler, and you know, you have such a rich background with intelligence and expertise on what Russia's going to do. If the United States were to react aggressively, does that, in your opinion, would that just kind of drive Russia further into the arms of China, or maybe cement that their relationship a little bit more? It's not exactly like they're entirely close, but they do have some overlapping interests.
So that's a good question, Dana. It will not drive Russia closer to China. Here's why. I know that there's all this talk about the Russians and the Chinese being strategic partner. This is a complete disinformation. Russia fears China as almost as much as the United States, right? It perceives China as threat number 2, a distant threat, because they share a very long border with the Chinese. The Chinese have been taking over non-militarily, but cultivating economically the Far East and intermarrying the Russians, right? So also Putin has noticed, obviously, and his national security apparatus, China's economic growth, China's, you know, basically developing U.S. dependency on many, you know, goods and services, mostly goods, right? We are totally depending on medical supplies, technology, a lot of other things. And obviously, China's military potential is growing exponentially. So there will be a point that Putin is concerned that China could conduct some destabilization activities against, Russia, because Russia has huge territory. That being said, Dana, the nuance is China and Russia, even though they're not strategic partners, Russia will never be US's ally and friend. They are only trying to pretend that they can be in order for the United States to drop economic sanctions, to drop some of the activities that some of the measures that we have taken, expelling their diplomats, which cuts off the intelligence collection capability and all those sorts of things. But that's a red herring. They will not be partners.